Did make progress with Texas Beyond History. Reached out to them again to see what's going on. I think are have a
I know. Even over one side, I go. Really am. Worry about me. Stand there.
Good evening, everyone. 30 seconds for this 7 o'clock. Long, exciting meeting this evening. So please take your seats. I will open the November 9th, 2023 meeting of the North Texas Archeological Society. Before we get started tonight, I have a few announcements. This is just a reminder that this is our last meeting for 2023. So if you have no idea how we got to November, neither do I. I'd like to welcome some new members that joined us over the course of the last month. We welcomed 6 new and returning members since our September. That's incorrect. Since our October meeting. It's the end of the year. I still don't have months correct, so everything is good. This is also a reminder that NTAS provides free memberships for students. This is entitled the NTAS Sponsored Student Membership on the website. So if you know any students who would like to join the society, please have them go to the website, read the instructions, fill out the form, send the correct information, and they will receive a free membership to our society. There are some new faces in the room this evening. If you would like to join the society today as a new member, your membership will be good through the end of December 2024. A big thanks to everyone who participated in our Texas Archaeology Month events. First at DAS Pioneer Heritage Festival, and second at a very wet and underwater Didn't Dig It. It did not rain the entire month of October until we had an event right at the end. So for those who attended, Didn't Dig It, thank you so much. And we look forward to doing it again in a year. This is a reminder that the annual NTAS Christmas party, forgive me, NTAS Christmas party will be held December 9th, starting at 5:30 p.m. in Keller, Texas. As always, it is a covered dish and drink supper and BYOB. Please see our November newsletter for more information. If you'd like to volunteer with helping set up, please contact Paula Bastine. Our January 2024 guest speaker is Jessica Lee Hamlin, who is the Executive Director of the Shumla Archeological Research and Education Center. Registration is open for TAS academies. The TAS is offering 3 academies in the winter and spring of next year, including brand new academies, zooarchaeology, a geoarchaeology 101, and a ceramics academies. For more information, go to the TAS website. NTAS will be helping with the ceramics academy, which will be held at Fort Worth Nature Center and Refuge at the end of April. NTAS scholarships are available to anyone for all TAS academies, the field school, and the annual meeting. Non-NTAS members may apply, and if they receive a scholarship, they will also receive a membership to NTAS. Please visit our website for the new and updated requirements that at this point are not so new, but they are updated. The NTAS Executive Committee voted unanimously to approve donating $250 to Texas Beyond History to continue to be a sustaining partner in 2024. I am proud to say that as a result of the folks on the next line, we have matched the $250 donation thus far. So at this point, we are looking to exceed it.
One announcement from Zoom, if you don't mind.
Go ahead.
Jim Blanton is attending, and Jim Blanton, for those of you who know, is a longtime member of the society and a former president. He just turned 90, so I just want to let him, yeah.
Thank you, Jimmy. So thank you to the folks who have already donated for Texas Beyond History, and thank you to those of you who will donate, I'm certain, in the near future. A couple of additional announcements that I do not have on here. The first is that we are going back to having a sign-in sheet at the front door, so that we can keep a running history of folks who attended the meeting in person. So if you have not signed in, please do so before you leave this evening. Secondly, yes, right over here, right by the door. Secondly, in our increasingly space-aged auditorium here, they keep adding mics and cameras and things like that. And as a result, our folks on Zoom are able to hear side conversations during our presentations. So, the only thing I will say is that if you would like for everyone to hear your side conversation, please continue to do so. But if you would not like that to happen, please keep those to a minimum, so that our folks on Zoom can really focus on our presenter. I feel like that was a teacher moment. I didn't mean it to be, but they can hear everything, folks, which is wonderful when we get the question and answer, but when we're in the middle of a presentation, it's not so great. So, with all that aside, I'd like to welcome our November 2023 guest speaker, Jimmy Arterberry.
You guys hear me?
Get a little.
Yes. Well, good evening, everyone. I'm happy to be here and thank you for inviting me to come and share a little bit of information with you. Tonight, you guys submitted a lot of very interesting questions. So I'm going to try to cover some of those as much as I can. I did annotate, the list. It's a 3-page list of questions. So I answered all of them. But it's, with each topic that you guys presented, really is how we're talking about a lot of them. So I'm going to kind of cover some of that as I go through this presentation. And at the end, then we'll have a chance to, have an open discussion, question and answer session. So to begin with, I'd really like to start, since we're talking about archaeology, back and teaching these Comanche people and go back to our, origins, so that you have an understanding really about what information is available, on the grounds, in the hills, through the trees. So I'm going to do that because I want to kind of create a visual so that, it kind of broadens the discussion here as well. Because when we go back and then come up with mountain range and stuff, the timeline, we enter the trade negotiations, the treaty negotiations, those kind of things all changes. So I'm going to start right here by creating, the Rocky Mountain chain, right? That comes down all the way into Texas, the Rio Grande. And then I want to go over here to the western part of the continental U.S. to California. And then I want to put it here the Bighorn Mountains in Wyoming. So this area in here is the area that we're talking about. Kind of in Texas, New Mexico, Colorado, those areas. So I taught at our Comanche College when I was over, and the elders were my biggest population of students. And I loved it because not only did I get to share information with them, but they shared information with me. So I really learned a whole lot more, and was very thankful because they shared a lot of, intimate family stories. So when I'd start my class, I would say to them, do you know that your ancestors were fishermen and weavers? And they'd be like, what? Yeah, it's hard to believe since we're known as horse people. But if we're going to start, then we have to go back as far as we can and then come forward, and then it all starts to make sense. So when we go back over the range and start here in the Central Valley of California, that's where our origins are as Uto-Aztec language speakers. And the language today is still carries some of the ancient words from the people from that time frame. There are certain things that have carried with us through that time period. Of course, as things have changed, we have modern words. Like my favorite word today, which is of a recent origin, is our word for hamburger. Old lady Manichai coined the word, she called it honeymoonking, which is really a funny word because it's really talking about a cow and the sweet meat. So language really kind of tells that story as well. But in our earliest origin, our people were here. So a lot of them went south, and them as the Aztecs, right? And then some of our people went this direction, and they went in multiple ways. There was never any one migration. Even today, within our Comanche history, our families have different stories about where they come from. We don't all agree that we came over the Rocky Mountains. Some of our people believe they came from the south. They believe they came this route. So when you get into the ancient sites, even here in Texas, there's a question mark there about, are those our ancestors? How are we related? And so modern science has already determined like who some of the tribes were in the historic setting, who was here for 1,000 years, 1,500 years, or less, and then those ancient peoples. But really, from our perspective and in our stories, and in the archaeological record, that also tells about these various migrations and stories. So for us as Comanche people, of course, we come across the Great Basin. Some of them went up north, and then our Paiutes, and then we have Timbisha, and all the other language speakers speak the same language as us. They all stay in different places, and then of course they say, some of our people say that they're the ancestors, but really, in reality, we are the ancestors. We are the ones that came the furthest, because when we cross the range, of course, the Shoshone are here, and you or other relatives, and as we continued on, some of them came further south, and others turned and come back. So we have relatives even up amongst the Pueblos, in the Mexico region, on this side. Rocky Mountain change. So you have to really think about it like with multiple migrations, and then there was a southern route back to California, the Yaqui who were here. So it's really a circular process of all of our relations. And for us as Comanches, those that came and stayed, which I'm descended of, and we have another descendant here, someone here as well, are the ones that are there in Oklahoma today. Some of them even went here down in South Texas and New Mexico. And I think the earliest recorded kind of campaign with Comanches in Mexico itself was around 1785. Dr. Martinez, Joaquin Martinez is done a lot of research on the south side of the border, so we work closely, sharing information and stuff. So that tells us in the timeline that the name Comanche appeared. So in the Spanish records, in the 1706, that the word Comanche originally appeared. In our former language, in our current language, we call ourselves Numina, but we were also Nuina, Numinu, and Numina. So our Shoshone and other relatives, use the same type of linguistic words to describe that. So you're thinking about, all of this back and forth, and then thinking about the cultural material, the exchange, the trade network, then all of that is going to appear in the archaeological record. Now, another important aspect of that is we're known as horse people. The horse was a commodity in exchange, it was our currency. But before the horse, actually, it was the Olivella shell, which came from the coastal regions. And so we still kind of utilize it. So it was our first currency. So here in Texas, there are about, as far as I know, because I've been working on it for a while, 13 to 17 sites that actually have an Olivella shell. That's not indigenous to this area. It comes from the coastal areas. So I've been tracking some of that data as well. So these are some of the things that you'll find in the record, here in Texas specifically, that tie back to Comanche history and culture. So the idea is to really kind of paint that picture for you guys to understand that when you're looking at that, because there's a lot of people that see that, is this a Comanche side, is it an Apache side, a Kickapoo or whatever, then the road itself is what we have to look at to kind of assess. And it will reveal to you kind of more information that will help you just, as you guys know, from, working in the field, doing those studies and stuff, to help, solve the mystery. Sometimes there's layers of history, that will be at some of these sites as well. So I wanted to kind of start this presentation with that, and then I want to talk about, archaeology itself, work that you guys have done and where we are today, and some of the things to look for. Now, you guys, as far as I know, are the first ones that actually have identified a marker tree on the site form. So I want to put that out there. And that's site number 41HD111. It's called Comanche Creek site. So we really appreciate the fact that you guys took that initiative to, reach out to us and ask us questions and actually start including those type of things on your site forms. Now, the last 15 years, I have spent basically adding, our grandmothers to the record, because you guys have your site forms where you're looking, and filling out certain things. Well, one thing that has always been remiss in our history is the story of our grandmothers. People think of Comanche history and they always think of the warrior spirit. Well, our grandmothers were warriors too, but they think mostly of the masculine side of things. And so they look at tools like arrow points or scrapers and things like that. But really it's like, there's been a lot that's been missed. And so what, the last 15 years, we've been really kind of like trying to get you guys to add this extra lens. So when you look at the typical things, as you're evaluating performance surveys, I've been asking people to, okay, look for things, and see what you can identify, but then also add this other lens to you and start looking for women's tools, things associated with women in the camp, because the women were really the homemakers. When the men were away, our grandmothers were doing everything from tending to horses, raising kids, and even hunting and gathering food. So that part of our history is really very prominent in the historical record as we speak. So we're working to try to create a broader picture of who we were, where we come from, who our people were. So that's another thing that I would like you guys to consider. You've added the marker tree as a resource. Well, now I'm asking you to also consider looking for things like women's tools, those hearths that you find, you can all find things that are related as well. So in this journey, there's going to be things that will appear, and I would call them anomalies for the location, because like I said, the Olivella shell is a coastal item. It's not, the plains. So if it's there, then it's kind of an anomaly, but it also tells a story about the past. So, I think it's very important to consider, a broader window into history when you're looking at a Native American site, and specifically Comanche. I've looked at all kinds of sites, Apaches and Tonkawas and other tribes, but because I'm Comanche, of course, that's my area of expertise, the area that I really, look to and do more research on. So I mentioned marker trees. That was one of the questions. I got a lot of questions, as I said, from you guys. And there was some really interesting questions, but somebody asked about marker trees and they wanted to have a little bit more. Well, we were at Big Bend this week and we was identifying and the Texas Historic Tree Coalition was presenting the Big Bend Park with a plaque on a marker tree, a Comanche marker tree. And, you know, it's kind of interesting because the next day, Jimmy was down there with one of the park rangers that he knew as well. So they had a chance to like, you know, visit as well. But one of the things they were asking about, there's kind of this concept when people hear marker tree, they immediately think of what they call a culturally modified tree. And a marker tree doesn't have to have been changed and altered by humans. A marker tree can represent something that was created naturally, but was used as a guide, you know, or as a resource itself, whether it was medicinal. We call them service trees at the core in our marker tree book, because they all trees serve a purpose, you know, whether it's medicinal purposes or whether it's as a guide, you know, or a burial, or like a tree. And I always think about the Ross Perot tree, the tree oak in the Capitol that was poisoned a long time ago. I remember that. You know, and Ross Perot, you know, wrote this check to try to help save it. So and people really relate to those kind of things. So now the discussion, you know, is kind of broad, and people are starting to understand better that a marker tree doesn't have to be modified. It didn't have to be split or tethered. It can be a natural feature on the landscape. In our particular area, that it has to fit into a certain timeline because when the Comanches actually entered Texas as Comanche people. So in that window of time, like I said, some of the people went back and became Utes, because when the government established those parameters at the reservations and negotiated the treaties, some of the Shoshones that were with us stayed and became Comanches. Some of them became known as Utes or Shoshones. So, and I've worked with some of the elders and those tribal communities as well, and share that same. So, really interesting when you think about, you know, the cultural material that, you know, the people have here, then the campsites itself, you know, the information that's contained there. Let's see. Some of the questions that, you know, that were asked had to do with, you know, the Pueblo fairs, and the treaties, and the trade items and stuff. And I've compiled a complete list of, you know, treaties and campaigns and trail items that between the years of 1680 and 1867, Comanches have had 62 peace negotiations. And that's with everyone from Spain to France to, you know, Chihuahua, and then ultimately US. So, and within those trade negotiations, there was gifts that was, you know, given. So you find some of those things also, you know, in the archaeological record as well, because a lot of the times back then, people really didn't, they received things, but it really didn't hold such esteem that they kept it forever. Some did. And then also some things were actually buried as part of that negotiation. So those things still exist out there. I know that we looked at a tree in an area that, you know, this man had told us about. You know, the county there had done some dig, and they had unearthed, you know, this big stone, and underneath it was a tomahawk and a bow that had been broken. And we knew immediately that was a, you know, peace negotiation, you know, that was held. So, so my point is that, you know, within that, you know, there are a lot of other materials that, you know, become visible in the type of work that you guys do. You know, that were part of those treaty negotiations as well as trade. Everything from musket, you know, to flintlocks, you know, to whiskey bottles, horse gear. So if you think about that, even today, you guys are doing, looking at, you know, some of these site forms, some of those things that show up, and really they might say, oh, it's just an old whiskey bottle. But a closer look, and you might determine that actually, you know, it's part of that whole time frame. It could have been, you know, one of the trade items for the area that was negotiated in some of the. So I think it's very important to, like, when you're doing that kind of work that you guys are doing, to consider, the material, not so much in the context of a US setting, but as a possibility of being utilized for some of those treaty negotiations. And in that context, it changes the whole story. I know in the past, there was a lot of things that, and a lot of sites that we revisited that they did not know or recognize as Comanche signs. But when we had a chance in consultations to look at some of the stuff, we were able to expand the picture and tell a little bit broader story about what it represented. And then usually when we're involved, it will there's things that we see that maybe other people don't. And I know that some people have a real ability to like recognize things when you're doing field surveys. Like, for example, lithic points, some people really spot them easily. I'm one of those people that never really had just like where, I didn't really see them. But what I seem to have an eye for is meteorites. So I went to a ranch here in Texas where they were like tons of, lithic materials being found. And I was like, there's all this meteorite, pieces here. And they were like, where? And I showed them, and it was like lots of fragments of meteorites. So they were very surprised. So that's where it's like working with Native peoples, because we see things a little different than other people. And some people are gifted with vision to see certain things that others don't. And that's why it's important to kind of collaborate, work together so that, when you do those kind of research studies that, maybe new questions are posed or new things are revealed or identified. So, so it's very important, to kind of just, be a little bit broader, in your view as you're doing, kind of the technical part of what you guys love to do, which is learn more about history, right? So, sacred sites, TPs, and cultural properties. That was a really important question, and it's like I did want to talk about that because, there's various types of sacred sites. That was a real different. Let me find it again because I do want to talk about that just a little bit. Sacred sites, sacred places, or TCPs themselves are considered traditional cultural landscapes. And they could be broader areas or regions that detail TCPs. But there are multiple properties or sites in Texas that include Paladuro Canyon. These are all TCPs or TCLs. Paladuro Canyon, Big Bend National Park, Waco Tanks, Enchanted Rock, the Guadalupe River, Trinity, Pecos, the Colorado, the Rio Grande. Each of these properties or locations entail specific occurrences and resources that are significant today, just like they were in the past for people. Archaeological work has enhanced and corroborated written as well as oral history, which elevates the significance of these important locations. So there's a lot of activities because, with development, civilization constantly changing. We say that these places that are significant, there could be a Walmart there, but it doesn't change the fact that that's a significant location for us. So, cell tower reviews, my 10 years, TIPO, cell tower reviews, all the pipelines, oil and gas lines, and even oil and gas lines now have reached a level of a national register eligibility, which is really interesting. So all of those things, that, are impacted by human activity, are important to the record. When it comes to sacred sites, traditional cultural property, it's really a challenge because, we generally have to define those areas. Now, in my experience, as for the tribes, it's easier for us to kind of determine that ourselves. So then we can, decide on the parameters of these TCPs, whether it's a 500, feet circumference, or whether it's an octagon shape, or whether it's a mile, whatever it may be. But TCPs are really something that's important. And I think about, like, I just came from Big Bend, as I said. To me, that would be considered a TCP. Is it limited to just the mountain top or the tree itself? I don't think so. I think that, for Comanche people, we would consider, the property itself, because all the things are connected. We had a case where it's like, we got into some litigation with the military over a piece of property, and ended up in court. And the elders, they wanted us to say what was sacred in the location. And of course, it was like, how do you say this right here, this spot is sacred when it's all sacred? And so the elders are really upset because, they said, you should have told them it's all sacred. But the judge said to me, explain it to me, show me so that I'll understand. And so that's exactly what happened. So they showed it, touch on the map, that's what you're talking about. So I did, and then he understood it. And then we actually got him to come into the field, we saw and felt for himself the importance of it. So when it comes to sacred sites or TCPs, they're not limited to like an exact location. They can be, and they're everything from a high peak to, a tree. For some tribes, it's a rice field. It's a burial site. It's a place of power. So, they're all different. TCPs and sacred sites are all different. It depends on the culture itself. I think about like some of the bombings, like of course, in Oklahoma City, the burn building, that's a sacred site now. And there's a tree in that, that chairs that they have erected, the tree that lasts in that blast. I think about like, here it's and then also, major disasters, like the trade tower. So those are all places that, like, are held high reverence, the people themselves. So TCPs are not limited to just Native people. TCPs, belong to everyone. And that's another thing that we try to discuss is that, when we talk about these places, not really saying like claiming ownership, like we own it. It's not about ownership, it's about recognition. And so in my early years, I would come at it hard and stuff, and people would be kind of put off. So, that I realized that they can't relate because we're making it just an Indian thing or Comanche thing. If we talk about American history, they can relate to that. We can all relate to that as Americans. We have different ethnicities, some of us are multiple nations and stuff, but just as people, we can understand. And I think, the field of archaeology has really changed in the years, since I've been actively engaged. You guys today, me being able to be here and talk to you about some of these things, it's really significant change. In the past, I've worked with a lot of people that have had it a long time, and they just basically, discounted oral tradition, or they didn't, believe what the Native people were saying. And they used the example of, you would whisper into someone's ear something and then they whisper it to the next one, and by the end the story changes. Well, that's all true, but in reality, it's the same, but it's different. So language is a good example of, that, because we have a story of how, we began and how we were created. And over time, that story is the same. It's just the way that it's interpreted. So now, you guys, archaeologists, are actually, listening, to what Native people have to say, and being a little bit more open about it. And the reality is that, Indian people believe a thing and don't need it to be corroborated. And I'm sure all people have certain things they believe in that they don't need proof nor need corroboration. But the wonderful thing about the work that you guys are doing is that actually you're corroborating what we've been saying for a long time and what we understand. And so that's really the beauty of partnering, with tribes as well. the early, very beginning part of my career and stuff, we did a video and it's called Let It Keep. It means put them back, leave them alone, don't touch it, Comanche. And so in that, storyline, I'm asked that question about archaeology, and I say, and the law was presented to where it's like, archaeologists have the final say on all these things, all the way up to the, National Trust, and the National Register and stuff, and even in this case that we're, I did nominate one of our cemeteries to the National Register, and our SHPO in the state discounted it. She didn't agree to it and didn't think that it met the criteria. And I said, well, that's really a professional courtesy. I don't argue with your position on things. You shouldn't argue with mine. And so, as it turned out, we went through the whole process. It took about 3 years. But, as it turned out, I was correct, and so the thing is that, at that early point, it was like all about being, the field being kind of over Indian people in the final determination decision-making process. But today, through the 20 years of usually I've been doing this, and working with a lot of young students working on their degrees, graduate, undergraduate, even I have one PhD still but being able to train and talk and share information, it has really changed the course because people are more open and receptive, because not everything's done. And I know you guys know someone in the past from your experience that from that older generation that knows everything. It's like, no, I had a woman down in Austin at the annual American Society for Archaeology meeting a number of years back. We had just kind of revealed and had this whole discussion about some rock art in Mexico. And she came up there and said to me, that's not Comanche, it's Ute. And I thought, well, okay, that's your opinion. And I thought, and I was kind of pushing, I'm Comanche, I think I know what's Comanche. And you're telling me that, you're not even native.
Can't hear.
Telling me, sorry about that.
It's something.
But my point is that, because of the work that, today that's going on, it's really making a change in a more positive way. And so we're able to even share more and learn more even ourselves, because there's things that, have been forgotten that, are being revealed to us as well, that we understand it. And so you guys come to us and ask us, then we're able to yeah, we know what that is. And then, tell that story, about how it represents us as people as well. So I'm very happy to say that today, I feel like an equal partner with you all, instead of having to fight you. In the past, I had to fight you. But I train my students and employees that, when we do our work, we come friendly, old infantry, come friendly, get in, stick your foot in the door, and then when you get in, you can just raise all the cane you want. So you kind of pound it, you better get your foot in the door. So, but today, it's like I can say that, I can honestly say that. I have a student that I'm working with that's doing her research in Paladura, and last week, 2 weeks ago, I had a group of about 50 elders took out there and shared her research, and hosted a 3-day event. It was just really awesome because she got to share what she was looking at, and she proposed her study questions, and even some of the study questions she has, engaged me, and it's like, that's a really good question. That's something to really look at, something to propose for a deeper look at study. So, and I think, like I said, this list of questions that you guys gave me are some things to, really take a second look at, and reevaluate and say, we never really considered that, we never thought about that. That's really important to consider. So that's kind of my thoughts about that. So I'd love to, maybe a question coming up, next support the questions that, you guys did propose to me, but really, I just kind of wanted to share my thoughts about, kind of talk about this. I hope that you guys do this and got a broader picture of the trails that have been traveled, the history that's on the ground, whether it's, under the dirt, or whether it's, on the side or mountaintop. But, yeah.
Let me figure out this mic situation before we open up the floor.
Suggest y'all share that handheld.
Share the handheld.
See how it works.
Yeah, that's,
Okay.
it's when you crank these up to full volume, like I said, it's a space age room, but it starts ringing in here, and our audience on Zoom is having a hard time hearing us, so as we heard. Okay, so I'm gonna open up the floor for questions here. We've got about 20-25 minutes. So if you have any questions for Jimmy, let's have a conversation.
Hi, can you elaborate a little bit more about women's tools? Yeah.
Okay. So, one of the things you can look for, and we find this a lot, is little thumbnail scrapers. If you look at it, you'll find this stuff. And they're kind of disposable, when it comes to like, some of the ancient tools and stuff, we didn't have a Walmart, so you held onto your tools. I always tell people it's like, you have to think in that terms, because when they, fabricated a perfect life. It wasn't like you could just go get another one. So women's tools are generally lithic materials like that, or, during our kind of traveling period, we have these, and the mortars are represented in that. You guys see pestle mortar. Well, our grandmothers also had another tool that was called a unit, and it was bone that was carved from the knot of a tree. And it was when they left from one camp and moved to another, they just turned it upside down. So actually you can still find those. I've seen some in the field. I have our family's pounding bow. But they literally, because they were too heavy to move from camp to camp, but when they did move, they would literally turn it. So you might see just an old piece of wood, looks like a log, or just a piece of scrap or whatever, and actually if you do a little closer, maybe turn it over, you might find that it was a carved out hole and it's and you might even find the stone tools that went with it. I have the original stone tools with ours. So those are the type of things you'll find. And then I also like to think about, like, these herbs that you guys see. Those are like cooking places, right? So in some locations you'll see a lot of them, and it's like a lot of times, unless you're doing like a backhoe scoop or clearing out something, you might just see a charcoal stain, but really those also represent the home. So that our grandmothers cooked, and I know here in Texas, my dear friend, God bless him, who's gone, Austin Tom's, he did a lot of work with the ovens. There's a whole story of Comanches using those. And so we've done a lot of work in that area as well. So when you're looking at those type of things, those women. And another really important aspect is there are places, I've been to one specifically in California, not California, Colorado, and that whole traveling and horse trading and whatnot. There's an area that's near Colorado Springs. And it's kind of nestled in the mountains, and we find a lot of women's tools there, but that was where they would trade, when they raised the horses, they put the horses there before they passed them on up the range. And so we find a lot of women's material there as well. So, but most people see it and they just, I think debitage, but it's not debitage, it's actually, tools. So, and then there's kind of a misnomer. It's like everybody thinks that our grandfathers were the only ones making tools, but the reality is our grandmothers made a lot of tools. There was always women, even when they went on raids, horse stealing, there was always women. Our grandmothers called them loose women. So, because those are the ones that, the party girls that went, but there was always women on those trips, and always had to have women. And so it was a cold can or a can, there was always women there. So there's sometimes, you find remnants of that type of history in these locations as well. Pounding stones, for pounding meat.
We have what we call it labdala. It's pounded meat, jerked meat, basically is what it is. They pound it out, they'd add pecans here in Texas, for sure. Or sand plums, things for a little sugar and then, because it's dehydrated and it's delicious. But so in a camp setting, a lot of times you'll find just little things like that will really tell you. But like I said, you can't discount an arrowhead being manufactured by our grandmothers because they did that as well.
Two comments from Zoom. The audience question comes through real clear for folks. They don't have to necessarily repeat it. But Mr. Arterberry, if you would hold the mic just a little closer, it would help. Thank you.
Any other questions there?
Could you go back and address where you're talking about the Comanche and the Aztecs? I thought was it this way, or what's the differentiation in there?
Well, so we're connected through our language. So it's in New Mexico, the Nahuatls also speak our language. So what we're saying is that, through language, that's our kinship system. And I heard just on this trip that I think that some of the Nahuatls have done some DNA studies, so it'll be interesting to see how that all turns out because, we're all supposed to be related and connected, but in these migration stories and see, even with the Comanche migration stories, I know you guys have heard different ones about a fight between the chief's son and another one or something and a disease. And, there's different stories about migrations, but there were multiple migrations. It's not like just a big roving band of people left at once. And then you have to also think about the whole treaty negotiation. It sets a perfect example. You had Eastern Comanches down here trading with the French, here in this area. And then you had the British, and then you had the Western Comanches that were trading with the Spaniards, and then the Comanches were trading with each other between getting materials, whether it was from the French muskets or Bellicuse knives, the Spaniards. So Comanche started trading with each other as well. And they had all those trade fairs, San Antonio, out here in Taos, out near Capulin National Volcanoes area. So there was a lot of trade areas. And that was one of the questions that was asked. But another question that was asked about, the trade with the US and what did I think about all that. And I was telling Jimmy earlier that to me, the Comanche Empire and Pekka Himalayan, I think, is the best author on Comanche history. I don't agree with everything he said. I flag his book, totally, with my own commentary and stuff, because I read everything and flag it and add my own comments. I disagree here. This is awesome or whatever. But I think at this point, he presents the best overall picture of Comanche history, although there are some things that are remiss that he didn't, include. I think, in my opinion, with the trade negotiations, I think it's greed. I think our own greed is what caused our fall, because we were doing just fine going to Santa Fe to traveling and then going back out, whether it was to, the Purgatory River or trading with France, coming back, in this part of Texas and stuff. But Comanches kind of, I say, got lazy because they liked what they were getting. And they said, send those traders over here to us. So we allowed them to come into the territory. And by that time, they were able to map everything and know everything. So they knew where all the bands were, all the camps. So the point of this picture is right here is to kind of say that we're many people. We were never just one roving band of people. I come from the Loud Talkers clan myself. Our band relationships are multiple. So we have a whole history of the different bands we belong to. And that was another question that was asked about, the last 5 bands, but there were lots of over 100 bands at one time. But I come from the Loud Talkers band. We call it, say, Bivia Nino or Bivia Decwa. So they said we're at our best when we're, eating and arguing and talking loud. So we were camped maybe in this area, then maybe, down here it was Beneducas, the Buffalo Leaders, Kutsuducas, and Yapais, all these different bands. So when these things happen, it wasn't like all Comanches were impacted. The way we were impacted is by our relations. Even the famous Council House massacre, when they retaliated and burned Linville and all that, those people said, why did they do that to those people? These Comanches said, why do they do that to those Comanches? They're not us, they're friendly. We're the ones that are, terrorizing. And so they said, because they did that, we're gonna retaliate. So, in our broader sense of relations, going back to your question about the Aztecs, that's our connection, is through language. And see, some of our Comanches, I hosted a thing when National Geographic came to talk to our elders, and some of our elders believe that they came from the South. They don't believe we all came to Oklahoma from the North. So, and then all these other tribes, language that claim relations. I mean, the Yankees claim we have people in Taos, they now call themselves a Toya Band, New Mexico, through our Pueblo relations, captivity relations. So now, we've got all these relations, but it's all connected. And so the whole Aztec relationship is part of that origin, just like we're part of the origin. And if you think about it, they always say that they're the ancestors. Well, really, in reality, we're the descendants of the original peoples. We came the furthest out. So we are the genetic ancestors of all these other people, whether they like it or not. Does that answer your question? Glenn?
So is there a Comanche origin story?
There is, they're individual again, because the bands, the families. So in my family, we have a story. And I got this from my aunt when she was 100. I asked her, do we have an origin story? Because I visited with all my old relatives. And so she told us a story, and then we translated. My aunts, my mom, her sisters, they then told that same story. So it shows that the story changed, but through language, But in our story, our origin story, it starts out, and I'm gonna say in Comanche, and I'll tell you in English. So, Sol es dominance on milk, where Zudasa ita sokovid. So the story begins that we were traveling and we were in a hot, dry place. And our people were looking for water, they were thirsty. And they asked the creator for water, and he said, go this way. And they went, and then they came upon water. So that's our origin story. When you talk to the different bands, like even out here at Paladuro, some people have a story about the creator told them, go this way. And they went for like 5 days journey, and every time they thought this is it. And it's like, they said, no, that's not it, keep going. And so they kept going, is this it? They said, no, that's not it. So eventually they came to this place, they asked again, they said, is this it? And they said, creator said, this is your place. So some of them, actually, these Comanches, and our former chairman of Wallace Coffee did a video not too long ago I saw, where he tells about Paladuro, about that's their origin story. Some of us have an origin story that actually is Wichita Mountains, and then others have a story that is actually further in Texas. So again, you're not talking about one group, you're talking about all these different people, for different reasons, and their origin story ended up at a destination based on that itself. So, but there's not one origin story, just like there's not one migration story. And there's many ways to say one word.
There's some questions on Zoom. Noon, it's time. Okay, any questions, other questions there, Tommy?
What is the earliest date that you think the Comanche came to what is now Texas?
Pecos Himalayas book, the Comanche Empire, I think he pretty much documents that whole migration period, like 1720 Purgatory, Panhandle, Texas, by 1750 Edwards Plateau.
So you're comfortable with those?
I am, as Comanche, as a no. Comanche, I accept that, because Comanche is a word from someone else, it's a misnomer, but Weaver is a badge of honor. We're Namana, but when you say Comanche, our hair stands up, our pride is embellished because it represents warrior mentality, fierce, extra perception, strong-willed people, survivors. So it's a badge of honor to us. Would you agree? I do. So when you talk about history and science and stuff, then yes, I can only work within the constructs of modern science. I cannot in within the constructs of the law. That's always been my challenge as I've done this work, is that, you know, I can't argue these are our ancestors because they're too old to have followed that trail. But we know they're our ancestors, right? Our relatives. So, and it's all about legalities, because, you know, we have treaties which give us legal rights. And then, you know, in the concept of even the work you guys do under ARPA, NHPA, NEPA, all those things, it's all regulatory. So we can't really argue further. And so when we reach that limit, that's when we as tribes come together, because when we come together as Indian people, we can then bridge that hurdle. So yes, as a Comanche, no, as a
So as a Nemino, we
oh, thousands of years ago.
in Texas, not just.
Yeah, yeah, because it's like, you know, when I go to South Texas, I see people that, oh my God, this looks, I can name them. That's so and so. That's so and so, you know, and, you know, some of them still speak, you know, Aztec language, and you just instantly know these are our people. And some of them maybe speak Spanish, but those are our people, you know. So I think, you know, it's been such a long journey, because you think about all those migrations. And it's like, you know, it has to be. And in my own personal experience, that Loud Talkers clan that I belonged to in my original band, you know, when those Texas maps was created and some Comanches, we were still on the map. Baby and the end one. And so were the Benedictines, and so were the Benedictines. So Comanche, along with our band names in that earliest map, I think it was 1758. You know, I have those maps and it shows it. So we were actually under our band names before we were under the kind of name of Comanches. So in my work in southeastern Colorado, there was a panel that the military, I was doing some, you know, cultural research work, and they pulled this tumbleweed away from the wall there, and when they did, my heart leapt. I recognized it. That's our story. That's our family story. Sticky Fingers telling that story, and I knew it immediately. And I said, "That's my family story." And they said, "No, that can't be. That's 700 years old." And I laughed, because that's when the people were walking. That's before the horse. Our people didn't just because they got a horse and get out on the range. They were constantly on the move. You know, weather, food, relations. So when you ask, you know, do I think that these are like 1,000, 2,000, 6,000 years old? I do. I believe that, you know, at some point, maybe through the work you guys are doing, maybe, you know, I might be here, maybe not. It will be revealed, but yes, I do believe that.
What about your burial customs? Is that different between the different bands, or basically the same?
Well, because we're interrelated, because that was another question. I'll answer that question by talking about a political question. You know, we had a pure democracy. If within our band unit, we didn't agree with the current leader, we had the freedom to say, "I don't agree with you, I'm leaving." Or we had the freedom to stay. And so a lot of people change bands because of those very reasons, you know, and then sometimes when they marry another band, they would go away as well. But there was a lot of back and forth. So when you talk about burial practices, it's really dependent. I mean, we weren't real big on digging a hole and putting people in it. If there was a crevice there, then there are burials where they would put them in and pop rocks on it. Our people prefer to the mountain range, you know, to put them in a crevice burial. So we've seen a lot of those too. We even had some people that actually, you know, like scaffold burial, which is more of a northern plains style. So there's a variety of ways that our people were buried. Today, a lot of them are being cremated, which is a whole new way as well, which is really interesting to me. But you know, it all comes down to, like, you know, your inner marriages and the relationships, and everybody knows Comanches took captives. It was a power play is really what it was. You know, there's nothing more than, you know, breaking into the house, or, taking the most precious thing and you get a much more kind of negotiable, partner in the deal. Because we, took captives from not just white people, but other Indians, then, some of those traditions from like Hopi captives, Pueblo captives came with it. And so we knew, and the old people knew. I know when I was growing up, our neighbors to the south, my grandmother used to say, they're Pumpkins, they're Pumpkins. They said, no, they're not, they're Comanches. Well, in recent years, well, she's been gone since '85. In these past years, it was a man that was from that family that lived across the research, and come to find out their origin were Tongawas. So those old people always knew. They always knew everything like that. But the traditions of those other tribes sometimes came with them. So if they had a burial practice that came with them, then that would have been applied as well. But generally for Comanches, those were kind of the type of burial practices that we prefer.
You spoke a little bit about women's roles, the things that they did. Were there roles that were strictly for the men and then strictly for the women? And did they have roles that came together to work as a, unified front?
Yes, there were distinct roles, but just like in a modern society and from the dawn of time, you had people that worked opposite roles or two roles at the same time, but they were distinct. Like the training camps for horse riding were mostly for young boys riding. But how are the girls supposed to learn how to ride? They had to ride horses too. You know what I mean? And our grandmothers were great riders. Because when the men were off riding still more horses, our grandmothers were the one that were feeding them and tending to them and doctoring them. And then, to me, another thing was that, this has kind of come about recently in my life. I lost my mother a year ago, and I think about, this is a question I posed to some of my other Comanche relatives. Is it the womb or the seed? I come from the Comanche womb. My mother came from the Comanche womb. My mother from the Comanche womb. So, it's a question. I'm not asking for an answer, but it's a thought. So, those inherent, innate, DNA things that, come with that. I think really make, a person who they are. So, and with our grandmothers, I thought, daughters, most important. I'm sorry to tell you guys this, daughters are everything. Sons are great, but daughters, bring you lots of grandkids. They tend to your horses and take care of you in old age. Everything. So, and I know more sisters than I know brothers. So that's just something to me. And everybody wanted to have daughters, they could train for horses or they want to get son-in-law. I think daughters are everything. And look back, it's like it's our grandmothers, really, I think, in my personal opinion. I don't care if everybody agrees, they have their own opinion, but in my personal opinion, I think our grandmothers really did most of the work, honestly. And even the traditions that's carried on, most of us have learned from our grandmothers. So, you're a Comanche man. What do you think about your grandmother?
I was always told the women didn't work and the men, if they weren't hunting or if they were lazy.
Well, I think they did something. Our grandfathers were pretty awesome too.
Time for one more. Are there any other questions?
Got one.
Well, we got one from Zoom. Go ahead. We can hear you in the room. You can ask it.
Okay. You were talking about going down to Austin for a meeting and afterwards, and then that's where the volume cut out. So we don't know the rest of that story. You said a woman approached you and challenged you on something.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I was down in Austin at an annual meeting for the, I think it's like the Archeological Society's annual meeting. And so, we were doing a presentation down there, and it had to do with the rock art that Dr. Fowles had been doing in tiles. Cause that's a meeting for people everywhere to do presentations, and, there was a woman down there that came up to me and said, that's not Comanche, that's Ute. To the rock art, and I was just like, okay. I mean, and I just thought, how rude, you have a Comanche standing in front of you and telling you, and you're trying to like tell them they're wrong. So I said, whatever, it's like, I accept that because I thought you're an idiot, I'm not. But in my experience, that's the challenges people want to correct you, and I'll tell one more story, because there are a lot of stories, but we were down in Galveston at a consultation, and the Texas SHPO was there at that meeting. And our chairman at the time was Johnny Walkway, and I love this story because, we brought in some of our relatives that were trying to keep people out. So we brought in some of our other tribal relatives that were Comanche, the Coetanians and other tribes. But in that meeting, it was kind of a back and forth between the Corps of Engineers and the tribe, and the chairman said to them, what can you tell us about Comanches? And so the SHPO immediately started telling them our history. And that was the whole point, here you have a whole delegation of Comanches, and you've got a non-Comanche telling us who we are. So we just laughed about it. And then he started telling us, but then he realized the catch, and he said, oh, and then he got mad, sat back down. So the point is that, when you have Comanches in front of you, I'm not saying that every Comanche knows everything, because I certainly don't. But what I'm saying is that, if you have a tribal person that's in front of you and you ask a question, then you have to consider what they're saying. You can't tell them they're wrong and try to tell them who they are. And that's what this woman was doing. So, and it didn't matter to me because, it's all been completed. It's, pretty famous now. So, but that was what the story was about going to Austin and being told no.
Thank you.
All right, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us this evening. Please join me in thanking Jimmy for joining us as well. That I will close our final meeting of 2023 at 8:06 p.m. I'll see you all in January. Thank you for coming.
Good night, everybody on Zoom. Good night.